week of Zoo School Live for the summer. School is so thanks so much for joining us for our very last Monday session. First, I wanted to show you our work of Rosie from Levon. He is from Canada. And it is just the most beautiful representation of our eight-legged friend, Rosie the tarantula. So thanks so much for sending this in and for staying tuned and watching, Levon. That's pretty awesome. So today we are going to be meeting one of the most impressive animals from North America, Ryan, and he's going to be going ahead and telling you all about our lovely ladies that we have here today. So thanks again for joining us, everybody, and I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you. Hello, friends. My name is Ryan. I'm one of the keepers here at the Elmwood Park Zoo. We are joined today by the largest mammal in North America, the American bison. We have our own little herd here. They're a family, so Dakota, Wendy, and Francis. And I threw food out, but they're choosing to not hang out with us. So they'll be free roaming around their exhibit. Maybe they'll come hang out with us in a little bit. But Dakota is the mom of our 22 years old. She turns 23 this year. Her daughters, Wendy and Francis. Wendy is 17 and Francis is 16. So all of our ladies here are actually quite old. Bison only to 25 years in captivity. In the wild, it's even less than that. I'd say they're the largest mammal in North America. They weigh up to 2,000 pounds, and those are the boys. The girls are usually around 1,000 pounds, half of that, and they can be up to 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Now, through this whole time, you're going to be hearing me refer to our beautiful ladies as bison and not buffalo, and I'm doing that on purpose. The word buffalo has a lot of cultural history in the United States. And it's used interchangeably, but when you're talking about these guys, it's not actually accurate. When you're going back to like pop culture and movies, or even historical figures like Buffalo Bill, that's kind of the reason why it's so deeply rooted. Buffalo, you're actually referring to the Cape buffalo or the water buffalo. And when you say bison, you're referring to these guys. I mean, bison is the scientific name for the American bison. So you couldn't get more accurate by saying bison to refer to these guys. But there's a couple main differences. So buffalo are...
I think we're back.
We're back? Sorry about that, friends. Seems a little bit of cellular signal here. But I was talking about the difference between the buffalo and the bison. And the American bison, these guys, their scientific name is bison. So when you say bison, you couldn't be more accurate by saying bison. Buffalo refers to the water buffalo or the Cape buffalo in Africa and Asia. And they do have some pretty major differences. So buffalo have much longer horns. They kind of sprawl out like this. You could probably picture it. Bison have a lot shorter horns. Bison also have that iconic hump over their shoulders. So they have a really, really muscular system to help use their heads like snow plows. Out west, they get a lot of to push all that snow out of the grasses that are below it. And the last thing that's pretty different, bison are hipsters. They have these really, really long rockin' beards, and buffalo don't have those beards. Those are really the main differences between these guys. They do have these super thick fur, which I do have over here. That is really, really, like this just pulled off one of them this morning. It's really thick and it helps insulate them really, really well. So out west when it gets quite cold, this works so well as a winter coat that it keeps them completely insulated and protected from the snow. So much so that on really heavy snows, it'll actually just land on their fur and not melt. The only way it comes off is if I'm moving around and it falls off. I had talked about how they use their big heads as snow plows, and wild bison absolutely do that. They push the snow out of the way with their heads to get to all the grasses below. Our ladies are, I'll call them pre-Madonnas, because they don't do that. We had a couple of blizzards recently, maybe in the last couple of years, and the bison wouldn't go or do anything unless we shoveled past have lots of grass grown in their exhibit. Wendy's exhibiting that for us right now. So they do eat a lot of that grass, and they keep it nice and low for us, so we don't really have to worry about mowing. We get a bale of Timothy hay, and then they get a wild herbivore grain to kind of supplement them so they get all the nutrients that they need. Public feeds here with them so as well from the public. Bulk of their diet, it's a herbivorous diet, which means that they eat nothing but plants. They can live, like I said earlier, 20 to 25 years, and so our ladies are on the older end of things. And one of their natural behaviors they do is they do a thing called wallowing. It is where they will, lots of animals do it, not just bison, but they'll roll around in some dirt or mud, and that helps a bit like sunscreen and a whole lot of bit like fly protection. So they'll cover themselves in mud, and it acts as a barrier so that flies, biting insects, have a much more difficult time to get to them. It also cools them down a little bit in the really hot summer. And in the fall time, the males go through a thing called rut, and when they are wallowing during that time, it's also kind of showing off. It's the males being like, look how big I am. If they can roll around and make a huge dust cloud, it can be...
Maybe we're back.
Are we back?
Sorry, guys.
I hope we're back. I was talking about the wallowing in the bison, and how male bison will actually, during a rut, which is in the fall, around that September to October time, they'll be wallowing to show off. Look how big and strong I am. And during that time, they also do this really impressive roaring. It almost sounds like a lion roaring. They get also really fired up on testosterone, and that's the time when bison are probably the most dangerous. And so if you hear reports of male bison like chasing cars and stuff like that in Yellowstone National Park, usually around rut. They're so fired up and they're so focused on competing with each other to have their own harem of females that they are playing with rage, I guess you could say. And so if we find if you guys go to Yellowstone, it's always a good practice to keep distance, but in the fall time especially, we want to make sure we're keeping our distance from our bison friends because they can be, especially during time. One thing kind of about their mood, a bison that's really relaxed, you can actually look at their tails for it. So if their tails are just happily swishing back and forth, they're kind of using it as fly protection, but it usually means that they're nice and calm and relaxed. If their tails are straight up in the air, like it a lot of times will mean they're a lot more agitated. And if you see that, it is a very good idea to stay clear, because I'm not they might charge, they might do something that's unexpected. Look around our ladies, a lot of them, all of them, their tails are low, swishing back and forth, so they're nice, happy, and content. They're just great grasses. The last thing about the bison as far as different facts about them is their habitat that I wanted to talk about. And nowadays, habitat is much smaller than it was 500 years ago. So 500 years ago, you would find bison everywhere in this country. In the United States and Canada, they were everywhere. You find them here in Pennsylvania, and over a very short period of time, the numbers were cut down very dramatically, and now you really only find them in pockets throughout the country, mostly isolated out west. Yellowstone National Park, if you want to talk about bison, usually people think about Yellowstone National Park as the iconic place for bison. And that space is the only space right now that has 100% like genetically wild bison, because we had to do a lot of mixed breeding between cattle to help restore the population. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But we'll talk a little bit about their history. So I had said about 500 years ago in the 1500s, estimated 30 million bison, and they spread throughout the entire country. You couldn't go somewhere and not bison. They were everywhere. But what happened as colonization happened, the Native Americans, the people that lived here before the colonial times when Europeans settled over here in the United States, they relied 100% on bison for food, for clothing, for tools. They would use their meat for food, obviously, to feed their families. They would use their fur to make clothing out of and make bedding material out of. They would use their bones for tools. They would use their horns for just they would use every single inch of the bison, and it was their livelihood. They depended on the bison. And the settlers who came over here knew that. They recognized that. And so it was basically an initiative to try to control the Native Americans, that they very aggressively poached the bison. And as the colonials moved west, they just aggressively poached the bison. And in a couple hundred years, not even that, 100 years, from the 1800s, the late 1800s, around 1880, their numbers dropped to about 300 individuals. And one of the reasons why we can sit here and say that the bison is not extinct, we can thank Theodore Roosevelt. In the late 1800s, 1884, he had actually gone out west to hunt bison, and that was his original goal. He was a huntsman, he was a hunter, so he was going out to hunt bison. But what he had encountered when he did that changed his life. He instead came home, and instead of like being pro hunting, decided to create an initiative. So he had created the American Bison Society in 1884, and that basically helped protect the bison. So the Bronx Zoo, well, it was I forget, New York Zoo at some point, but not the modern day Bronx Zoo, actually pulled a lot of the bison that were in the wild off to start a breeding program, and they are a big part of why they're saved today.
Oh, I think we're back again, Ryan.
Are we back?
I think so.
I'm so sorry, guys. This is turning into a bit of a... So I'm going to wrap up a little bit on the history, and then we're going to take questions just really quickly. So their numbers went from 325 individuals in the late 1800s to today, because of the initiatives by Theodore Roosevelt and some of the awesome individuals that helped conserve them. There's about 500,000 individuals now. So we had this huge growth. And in 2016, President Barack Obama actually passed a law declaring the American bison as our national mammal. So now they've joined the ranks of the bald eagle, and we should be really excited and prideful of that. So that's the history of the American bison, and I guess we'll take questions now.
Yeah, so we're going to skip to some questions. All right, so it looks like Megan wants to know if we have any...
Do we have any male bison? We right now do not. We used to. If anyone has been here over the last several years, we had a male Tatanka. He was a big boy. He was about 6 feet tall, 2,000 pounds. He unfortunately passed away. He was just an old man. He was in his 20s. It was a really unfortunate, sad day, but it just happens. Yeah.
All right, so it looks like Liam would like to know, why is the fur on their face darker than the rest of their body? And then Ronan would like to know, what are their predators?
So the fur on their face, you know, I'm not sure there's a particular reason. Every individual is unique. Even if you look between our 3 girls, you'll see a difference between all of them as far as their fur goes. Wendy's a lot lighter, and then Francis is a lot darker. So it's just an individual by individual basis. As far as natural predators go, once they're adults, they really don't have any. Humans are really their biggest threat once they're adults. But calves will be hunted by wolves, and occasionally bears, mostly wolves.
All right, so someone says that they love that they're a family, which is pretty great. Oh, Mikey Romano can't wait to be back. He hopes we'll be open soon, so definitely stay tuned to our Facebook. I'm sure we'll be posting there when we are open to the public. It looks like Laura wants to know, do they have different personalities?
Yeah, they certainly have different personalities. So I could go for different things. Francis is probably the most stubborn. He's the one off to the left eating hay by the black tube. When we're shifting to move our bison back and forth so we can clean their exhibit, she is usually the one who... I'm not going to do that right now. Eating this hay. Wendy is the most sociable and I would say friendliest. She's the most likely to come up to the fence wherever we're at and looking for snacks. She's also the most timid with some things. So like we do injection training so they get their vaccines voluntarily every year, and Wendy does not like to participate of all of them the most. She gets super nervous around all of that. Dakota is the boss of this exhibit. She's the most likely to headbutt the fence if you get too close to the fence, and that she tries to do it to us all the time. She's a bossy bison.
It looks like Mia would like to know, how fast do they run?
How fast do they run? They can top out at 35 miles an hour, which, like I had said earlier, is faster than the fastest man on Earth. It's faster than Usain Bolt. Far faster than I can run.
That's pretty speedy. I would definitely not want to be around a running bison. Sounds kind of scary. All right, so Laura was curious, how do they deal with the hot weather, and especially now that it's getting super toasty out?
Yeah, so if you guys come to the zoo, you'll see in the middle of the summer when it's like 100 degrees, our ladies don't want to do much at all. They'll usually just be laying around. They'll find like a nice wallow, like I talked about earlier, to kind of like cover themselves in nice cool mud. But most of the time, they just choose to lay in some shade and not be very active during that time. And then they'll increase their activity when it's cooler, in the early morning, late evening, even throughout the night. Kind of running around and doing a lot more active things.
Awesome. So Joseph is curious, how small are they're born?
How small are they when they're born? They are quite large at birth. They can be 30 to 70 pounds, like that 50-pound average. So you picture like a dog, honestly. Like that's about the size that they are at birth. Yeah.
Pretty awesome. RJ is curious, how soft is their fur? Is it soft or is it
It is super soft, super fluffy. The Native Americans knew what they were doing when they were making clothing out of this stuff, because it's not coarse at all. It is like a pillow. It's super soft.
That's awesome. Rob is curious, when are their birthdays?
Ooh. Okay, so I'm gonna have to look up exact dates because I can't pull it off the top of my head. Wendy and Francis were born in May. They were born in May, so they had birthdays very recently. And Dakota's was in the fall. I want to say it was September. Turning 23 really soon, actually, in a couple months. It's gonna come up in no time.
Wow, that's awesome. And we'll be sure to put those in the comments. So be sure to check back on your comments. Make sure we put those birthdays in there. And it looks like, how much do they weigh?
How much do our girls specifically weigh?
Yeah, our girls specifically. Or if there's a range, I don't know. How much can they weigh, I guess?
We currently do not have a scale that weighs as high as bison weigh. It's definitely something we want to invest in. So we estimate, I can't actually tell you exactly how much they weigh right now, maybe one day, but they're around that 9-pound mark. Females typically are around like 800 to 1,000 pounds, and it's the males that weigh closer to 2,000 pounds. But it's a really great question, and hopefully someday soon I'll be able to answer that.
It looks like Rob is curious. Do they smile?
Do they smile? When they show happiness, I'm not sure that smiling is the way that they do it. When they're content, they're doing a lot of that tail swishing. I've never seen them smile. No.